Hello, this short video on research methods relating to business research is particularly focused on undergraduate research, but here are some basic ideas that any kind of business research is going to have to grapple with. As you can see on the slide, we're talking about qualitative versus quantitative. Really important to get the spelling right of those two, because otherwise they get very easily confused. Now, there'll be another short video about qualitative and quantitative data specifically, but here I'm mostly talking about the kinds of methods you might think about when you're discussing a research design. In business research, it's very often the case that we need to use mixed methods. In other words, both numerical and non-numerical information. And that's because businesses use both. If we look at the health of a company, of course, we can look at the financial statements, we can look at balance sheets, we can look at profit and loss, we can look at cash flow over time. But if we only look at the numerical data, we may find that we have either a skewed or perhaps a partial picture of the health of that company. If we want to have a rather clearer or richer picture of the company, then we might have a look at some non-numerical information, such as its performance against its own objectives, not just financial ones, but perhaps quality objectives, its staff morale, how productive its staff are and how it measures that, and the mood of its customers and the degree of engagement with customers, not just the numbers of complaints. So although this is a bit of a simplification, both quantitative and qualitative research approaches can be useful in a single research study in business, usually called mixed methods. There is also something called multi-methods, but we'll get into that when we're in the detail of how you choose specific data collection methods. If we're looking particularly at quantitative research techniques, then we're talking about any kind of technique which is for the collection of data or the analysis of data, which produces, generates, or uses numerical data. And of course there are different kinds of numerical data, and this will be in a subsequent video. We need to know the level of preciseness and intervals, for example, of the data that we are collecting, and that's quite a big issue which we'll cover separately. But for now, what are the key assumptions behind taking a quantitative approach? Well, basically this relates back to the idea of positivist thinking or research. Some of the philosophical underpinnings of positivist epistemology and objectivist ontology. Reality can be studied in quantitative research by understanding causal relationships or correlations or some sort of association between factors or variables or events, and this can be done through numerical relations. Knowledge can also be obtained about a phenomenon through testing propositions, and as I've said, this is very much the positivist approach. And there's an assumption that scientific knowledge is based on accumulating empirical evidence, and that might be survey evidence of a factual nature, or it might be a quasi-experimental study. I say quasi because we're talking about business research here, and it's rare to find something as scientific in terms of experiment as, say, a randomized controlled trial. That's pretty unusual in a business field. So here we're talking about empirical evidence as quantitative as possible, rather than looking at people's feelings or attitudes or motivations or personal views. However, if we want to do that, we would need qualitative research techniques. And that's going to be any data collection method or analysis method using non-numerical data or producing non-numerical data. And here the emphasis is on the social context that shapes phenomena. So, for example, organizational culture, policy, custom and practice. It's not about metrics, measuring, but about making sense of something. and this is based in the interpretivist tradition. When I talk about the social context, I mean that because business research has a great dependence on the behaviour and the thoughts and the knowledge and the attitudes of people, we need to take into account that people are not machines. They don't just know things in a factual way. They will be influenced in the way they think about something. And these influences can come from their environment, education, social setting, culture, ethnic background, and many, many more. Look at the power of advertising in business. What's advertising about if not influencing the way people think? And whereas product X may be of no interest whatever to a potential customer, with suitable influencing, we may be able to associate product X with something we admire or something we really need to solve as a problem, and we can start to think about product X from a different perspective. This isn't fact, this is much more qualitative than that. So the key assumptions in qualitative approaches is that any causal relationship, if this then that, will be affected by people's perceptions. And indeed, causal relationships may not even exist. They may be some sort of objective reality which, from an interpretivist point of view, doesn't exist. People construct relationships. And people contribute to their own knowledge through their own interpretation. They construct it. There can be more than one interpretation of any issue or phenomenon. So when we're planning a research design, we need to take into account epistemology, ontology, which is in an earlier video, but we also need to take into account qualitative and quantitative approaches. Try not to make decisions too early on in the planning of research design, because in business we will generally be using a mixture. And so you may be happier with number or happier with feelings and perceptions, but you might need to collect both. I'll be producing a separate short video which talks about the data that you actually produce through these techniques, so qualitative data, quantitative data, and a lot more things about what you can do with that data in another video. But meanwhile, if you want a general textbook to find out more about research methods in business, you can try www.bookboon.com for a textbook called Business Research Methods, authored by myself and Joe Martelli, or you can go to your library and find any basic business research methods textbook. Good luck.